The dive course. My father, Papa, was the first one in our family to scuba dive. However, it was my middle sister Pam that was the first one of us to take the official scuba diving course. Around that time, the mid 1970s, laws were changing, making it difficult to get a scuba tank filled without a certification card, so Papa soon followed in taking the course, along with my oldest sister Peggy. Since Peggy and Papa took Lester Paget's dive course together, I got to hear a lot about it. This tidbit is my favorite. The students were required to successfully navigate an underwater obstacle course in the city pool. Everyone lined their masks with tinfoil before donning their tanks and regulators, then swam and maneuvered through the water unaided by sight. If you know the basics of scuba diving, you know that one of the big rules is to always put your hand up above your head when you surface. It's very important and prevents you from coming up under a boat or a rock head first and knocking yourself out. In order to solidify this lesson with his students, Lester stood by the exit point with one of those big old power swim fins about 3 feet long. Every student that surfaced at the end without putting their hand up got a good whack on the head with the fin. Papa went ahead of Peggy, so he was watching when she surfaced without her hand up and the fin came down. He said he flinched in advance because he knew exactly what was coming. She was about to fly hot, like she was prone to do in certain circumstances. Peggy came out of the water, bowed up mad and cussing like you know who. But Lester backed her down quickly, telling her she'd be knocked out cold and possibly dead if she was in a real situation. Years later, she still kidded around and said she always put one hand up when exiting a bathtub. Lester Paget was a good teacher. Since Papa and his 2 oldest girls were now certified divers, it soon came time for his wife and youngest to take the course. Mama and I had some previous experience sharing Papa's regulator here and there while free diving in the Gulf, and Papa had taken me along on a dive with he and Charles Harnage at Peacock Slough when I was around 14. That was the first time with my own tank. After taking me on a test swim on the bottom of the spring run, we descended to just inside the entrance to the cave room, around 40 feet down. We didn't lose surface light or go back in the booger hole cave system, but we saw the foreboding signs. Back then, those signs were hand-painted. And there weren't those nice wooden steps going down to the spring either. Before entering the water that day, they had strongly cautioned me about moving around carefully without flapping my fins a lot as to not stir up the silt on the bottom, which looked like regular old sand, but was one of the reasons that spring diving could be so dangerous. Once stirred up, the silt becomes blinding. It's slow to settle and can cause divers to become disoriented. Up is down, and down is up. I'm not known for my athletic prowess and was always last to get picked at team sports, but I can swim like a fish and easily hover motionless underwater, so I was in my element. When the sun is out and high in the sky above the spring, the surface light shines into the underground room 40 feet down and lights it up, making the rock walls shimmer. The experienced divers I was with that day had timed the conditions to be perfect. It was very beautiful to be down there like a fish. Glancing down at the innocuous-looking sandy silt on the bottom, I wondered what the big deal was about, so I carefully reached down and tapped a spot with my index finger. Toosh! A mini mushroom cloud, the size of my fingerprint, arose a couple of inches and hung in the water without settling. I shuddered at the thought of the massive clouds of silt one of those big old power fans could produce if someone went to kicking in a panic. No wonder this place had a bad rep. Fast forward to 1978, and Mom and me taking the dive course together. She was my dive buddy. I was 15, she was 44. By that time, Lester was no longer offering a course, so we took ours from Bob Annan. We started the basics in his backyard pool, but then he moved the classroom to the bar pits down on Highway 98, there on the right as you go into Hickory Mount. Nothing on earth could convince me to swim in that pit today, but things were different back then, I suppose. Without question or complaint, Mom and I, along with the rest of our classmates, which, as I recall, included at least one of the Auburn twins, we put on our dive gear, climbed down into that malt water-colored pit of Florida water, and practiced scuba diving and safety training. One of the exercises was using the lifesaver chin toe to transport our buddy across the pit and back. I remember Mama floating on her back as I was pulling her along and trying to talk through my grasp on her chin. Polly, what are we going to do when a gator pops up? Neither of us had a plan. We never saw a gator. I think the gators saw us first. The 1970s. As we quickly figured out, Bob Annan was a river diver. As I mentioned before, the Ferrell family tended to sport around the south end of the county, primarily in the Gulf. We weren't really river people. Not yet, anyway. The next weekend, the class met at Goose Pasture, and Bob took us all scuba diving in the Wasissa River. It was the first time I'd ever been there. We waded out backwards with our fins on from the banks of Goose Pasture, tanks on our backs. Then we followed the boat path channel where all the grass is cleaned out, and the bottom is somewhat sandyish mud. The class kind of fanned out across the river as we felt our way along the bottom, nosing around for artifacts and fossils. Bob had us pumped up on what we might be able to find. The legality of doing this at the time is iffy, but Bob did identify one piece I found as part of a mastodon jawbone, and I treasured it for many years. After the Wasissa trip, when Bob mentioned an Osceola River dive, that's when Tommy Ferrell put her foot down. The bar pit was greenish water, and the Wasissa was clear, so at least you could see a gator as you climbed over him. Her words. But she went on to tell Bob Ann, with the finger shake, neither me nor my daughter are going diving in that black water. And she meant it. He didn't argue, and we got a pass. Then we started going to a few of the springs on the Swanee, which Bob considered more advanced than the bar pit and river diving, which I would think the opposite, but, you know, tomato, tomato. When we got to Jenny Springs on that first spring dive, Mama wasn't so sure about going down into that cavern, also known as the ballroom. But I was looking forward, having already been spring diving at Peacock, and I said to my dive buddy, "Come on, Mama." Jenny Springs was a fantastic dive that day. The cavern was a lot larger and open compared to Peacock, and the light shone in and lit up the whole room, making it sparkle like an underwater disco. It was 1978. After exploring a few more Swanee Springs, we finished up with open water dives in the Gulf. On our last test dive, Papa gave us a ride out to the artificial reef in the Lemon Drop, but stayed in the boat while Mom and I did our dive along with the rest of our class. We did the backwards roll with ease, dove down, swam around, and explored the reef in about 20-30 feet of water, and then ascended back to the surface together. The reef was not much more than a bunch of old culverts, but it did attract an impressive amount of plants and marine life. Mom and I both commented on how neat it was that fish weren't as afraid of a diver when you weren't holding a spear gun. We both passed the course and got our certification, which made Papa very happy, having all three of his girls and his wife certified divers. We logged many dives through the years, together and apart. Mama was able to keep up with her certification card through the years, but mine disappeared with a lost or stolen purse somewhere along the way. The parking lot of a dive bar, I think.